My name is Dwayne Mancini. I'm the CEO and managing partner at Project Medtech. What a year it's been for the Galen Data webinar series, and what a way to end it here. We've covered topics like building your A team, regulatory and clinical considerations for software as a medical device, risk management, quality management systems, cybersecurity, data science, and more. Today we'll be hearing from Jon, Raysa, and Annie from Silicon Valley Bank for a discussion on the latest medtech and health tech trends and predictions for 2023. Some of those topics will include how did medtech companies fare in terms of fundraising in 2022 compared to overall venture capital? Has there been any shifts between the stage and types of companies that are being funded? How have IPO and M&A markets been for health tech companies looking to exit? And what can the industry expect to see going into 2023? First, a few housekeeping items and some information on Galen Data. Galen Data is the cloud for medical device makers. The Galen Cloud provides a configurable platform for device-to-cloud connectivity that is compliant to FDA, HIPAA, and CE mark standards. Built on 40+ years of collective experience developing compliance systems in the medical device industry, the company's goal is to make medical device cloud connectivity available to all at a fraction of the cost while shaving months off the development timeline. And with that being said, I'd like to now welcome our guests, Jon, Raysa, and Annie. The virtual floor is all yours.
Great, thanks so much. It's really a pleasure to be here. We're going to take the next hour to give you an overview of what we're seeing out in the market. But maybe before we do that, we'll just do a super quick round of intros so you know who you're talking to. I'm Jon Norris. I'm Managing Director with Silicon Valley Bank. I've been doing this at SVB since 2006, and I manage the venture capital relationship group at Silicon Valley Bank. And so my job is to interact with venture folks in the healthcare realm on a day-to-day basis and talk about what's going on in the market, how can we help their portfolio companies, and as a part of that, I write a paper that Raysa and Annie are key parts to that as well, where we go into what's going on in the market. How are dollars that are being raised being deployed into the healthcare system? How does that match up with the M&A and IPO landscape that we're out there? So it's all about sort of informing folks and helping them be as smart as they can be to, one, as investors, make good investments and help support their companies, but also on the company side, be smart about what's going on in the landscape. So it's a great job. I love doing it. Maybe I'll let Raysa and Andy do a quick intro and then we'll get right into the slides.
Yeah, thank you, Jon. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here. My name is Raysa. I sit in San Francisco and I lead SVB's healthcare research practice, so researching the venture-backed healthcare ecosystem.
I'm Annie. I'm in New York City and I work with Raysa on the healthcare market insights side of things. So just a little plug for us as well. We released a health tech report last quarter or in October. So if you're interested in that, we'd be happy to send that out to you as well. All right, you ready to go?
Let's do it.
All right, let me just put this in full screen. Okay.
All right, let's jump to the first slide. And just, to give you a context of SVB, you sort of think about us as we're a big bank, but we're really focused on helping companies with some sort of secret sauce technology behind it. And so we obviously have a big tech practice, but our life science and healthcare practice is very, very strong as well. A lot of clients, a lot of assets under management. We work with a lot of companies that are sort of brand names out there, but we love working with companies that have an idea on a napkin as well. And we have a dedicated practice to work with those super early stage companies. If we go to the next slide. The other thing that we do that's a little bit special for SVB is that we have something that's called venture debt. And these are for really companies that have raised that traditional venture financing round. It's a way to extend that runway between financing rounds. And now more than ever, as we sort of see with the data that's coming up, venture debt can be super helpful for companies. And we're always happy to chat about that for companies that are interested. If we go to the next slide, you can just see a couple of examples of some of the bigger deals that we've done in the healthcare arena, anywhere from 25 to $100 million plus deals. And then the next slide after that are some of the smaller deals where you can see some medical device and health tech companies and some of the things that we do with these folks. So just give you a sense of the bank. We do have 30 offices nationwide. We have a presence in Europe that continues to expand. We have joint ventures in China. We have an office in Israel as well. So we really are an international bank focused on helping early stage companies succeed. So with that, maybe we'll just jump right into the slides. And so these slides come from our annual and semi-annual report that we put on twice a year. The next year's report's coming out January 6th, so be ready for that. So let's start with venture fundraising. I think this is a good place to start. When you think about fundraising, we look at every single venture fund in the US that gets closed on a yearly basis, and we say, do they invest in healthcare? And if they do, what percentage of the portfolio do we think they're going to be investing in healthcare companies in this fund? And those are the numbers that you see on the screen here. And you can see it's been a nice growth in terms of fundraising for healthcare. Up through 2020 was a big jump from 2019, but then 2021 really was, the record year. $28 billion to be invested into healthcare companies in that funds. All those funds next cycle. In 2022, we thought there was going to be a little bit of a decrease in that funding environment, but the first half of the year came in super strong at 15.8. So again, a lot of capital out in the market. If we do look at sort of numbers through November, there was a trail off in the second half of the year. It's probably going to come in maybe around 22 billion for the year, but that means it's the second biggest fundraising year ever. And so when you think about in the context of these funds, they're going to be investing into new companies over the next 2 to 3 years, and then supporting those companies over the next 5 to 7. So that is a lot of capital out in the market. And so if you think about it, $44 billion just in the last 18 months, not including the last 6 months, gives you substantial dry powder for the sector. In health tech specifically, we're seeing a lot of tech funds that are putting 10 to 15% of their fund into focused on health tech, which continues to be growing. And on the device side, what we have seen is a little bit of a pullback in terms of allocation to device, but still, there's capital out there and available to invest into companies. The next slide, please, Annie. So with that as an overview, let's go into how the dollars are actually being invested into companies right now. So this is data looking at investments into venture-backed healthcare companies in the US and Europe. And it's on a quarterly basis. And you can see, for context, 2020 at $57 billion, 2021, the record-setting $92 billion. If you go back into 2018 and 2019, that number was around 33 billion. So, we're 3xing in 2021 the amount of venture capital that's been deployed into healthcare companies just 2-3 years ago. And then what's happened in the first half of this year? A strong start to the year, but then we see, as you can see that red arrow, we see less investment in Q2 and Q3. And I think really there's a little bit of a paralysis that had been going on, at least in the early part of 2022, where you have existing investors that are, one, really trying to focus on their existing portfolio. It's like, how do I fund these companies that I've already invested in and make sure they have as much, as much cash burn as possible to their next round of financing? Or do we need to pivot business plans? Do we need to cut, et cetera? That's one issue. The second issue is because we saw so much public market sort of erosion in market cap for a lot of these recent IPOs, how do you establish the right valuation to do a late stage round? And so I think there's been a little bit of a waiting game for these investors, and I think that's what's leading to a decent amount of slowdown. If you do look from Q2 to Q3 of this year, every single sector is down. Health tech is down pretty significantly at minus 45%. Device, on the other hand, is still being funded by late stage investment and was only down 5%, which I thought was really interesting. But we'll get into more specifics as we go through. So let's maybe jump into device. Next slide. So let's focus first on early stage device. So this is sort of seed Series A, first round of $2 million or more. And you can see, over time, it's been fairly stable on the device side with some quarters that have been up and down. But if you look at 2022, the first half of the year, very similar to what we've seen in the past couple of years for seed and Series A investment. Q3 definitely has fallen down significantly, but it still sort of equals what we saw in Q4 of 2020. So not necessarily worried about that, but we do see just a little bit less investment on the early stage side in the second half of the year. But where the dollars really have been focused is on non-invasive monitoring and drug delivery technologies. That's really where we're seeing a lot of the early stage activity. Non-invasive monitoring really is sensor-based technology that has some connection to the cloud, where you're allowing folks to be able to monitor patients outside of the hospital setting. You've seen some really good exits in that way with Preventis and BardyDX as a couple examples of good non-invasive monitoring exits. You've seen a lot of activity there. Where you're not seeing as much investment is on the imaging side, as well as cardiovascular, which is really interesting. I mean, imaging with the AI ML technology mixed in with a piece of equipment, we've seen a lot of later stage investment in that area, but not as much. And then cardiovascular, where you are typically PMA sort of focused trials, you're not seeing as much early stage investment there. If you go to the next slide.
Hey, John, a quick question that came in related to that is how much is psychiatry? I don't know if you have that kind of granular information or not.
So psychiatry, I think, is probably a little bit more into the health tech side, which we're going to probably transition to, or we will transition to once we go through device. So when you think about device for how we calculate these deals, think about it needs to be a piece of equipment or a surgical technique. So it's either an implant, or it's a machine that helps in the surgery, or it's something you're wearing, like a non-invasive monitoring that's sort of monitoring your vitals, et cetera. And so if it's a piece of equipment, then that's what we're sort of looking at for a device. So for psychiatry, I think it's probably going to be much more of a health tech.
Yeah, the same person who asked the question said, sorry, too eager.
Oh yeah, no, and then we're going to get into it though, for sure.
Yeah, cool.
So with that, let's go to the overall sector within device. And I want to make sure we leave time so that we each have, we're going to do device first, and then we're going to transition to health tech. If we look at overall in device, it's really intriguing. As we saw in the previous slide a few slides ago, device continues to be pretty strong, and it's really been led by late stage. If you look at the top deals in Q3, a lot of them are non-invasive monitoring deals, and these are multi-$100-million deals. And I think that, again, is helping to prop up late stage in device. But if you look at the bottom left in terms of that chart of over $100 million deals, through Q3, there were 13 deals over 100 million in terms of financings in 2022, which is already more than the full year of 2021. So you are seeing big deals happening in device, which is really intriguing when you sort of think about, well, the IPO market is pretty closed. Overall, when you think about the exits are down, yet we see strong investment in device. And I think part of that could be the fact that a lot of these companies are in revenue, and you actually have financial metrics, and you're seeing investors coming into a sector where they can actually look at gross margin and revenue, et cetera, versus biopharma, for example. And so you actually have a little bit more stability of financial projections and real revenue that you can sink your teeth into. That may be what's driving some of this late stage investment. Next slide. And so this slide looks at the step-ups that we're seeing in 2022. And so basically, we're looking at deals that were invested in between 2019 and 2021, looking at what that post-money valuation is from that deal, and then looking at the 22 financing pre-money and seeing what's the step-up in valuation between those two financings. And what's interesting is actually device has the lowest median multiples of all the sectors. But still, when you look at it, the median multiple is up. There certainly have been some down rounds in device, but I think that may be one of the secrets for device. The fact that we're continuing to see such hardy later stage activity is because the early stage is not going crazy with step ups on the early stage side. And that may actually be, this steady Eddie sort of mentality is putting these device companies in a lot better shape than folks who had the 2, 3, 4, 10x step ups and are maybe way overvalued for where they are currently in their product development life cycle. We'll go to the next slide. And this is a slide that had actually kind of, surprised me a little bit, because the slide I was supposed to put up here when I was initially putting it together was like, look at all these deals where the post-money valuation of these financings are over 150 million. When you just put that in the context of M&A and device, the median upfront is somewhere in the 2 to 250 million. And it's like, okay, these companies are pretty highly valued. What happens in a down round environment where there's IPOs are difficult to come by? Can these companies raise? And are we going to see a ton of down rounds here? And so initially the idea was, geez, look at all these financings at really high valuations. It's really a danger for how they're going to raise their next financing. What was very interesting to me, if you sort of look in 2022, in yellow, I put what the step-ups are for some of these folks who actually did raise in 2022, and the step-ups are actually pretty good. Yes, there's one step down, but the others are 1x or actually significantly above. So I think what's very, again, interesting is if you set up these companies in a smart way where you're not trying to be so focused on valuation, but you do want to be rewarded for the value you're creating, but not in a way where you're actually putting your next financing at risk, you can really work your way into metrics that make sense. So this was supposed to be a cautionary tale slide, but it actually turns into a pretty positive slide when you look at some of the financings in 2022. Next slide, please. And so this slide looks at who's actually doing new deals. So we're actually doing the analysis of who is a new investor coming into companies in 2021 and 2022. And we sort of rank it by activity level and by what type of investor. So we have venture, we have late stage crossover, corporate, and then we looked at a couple of the different areas where we see a decent amount of activity and see which investors are sort of focused on that area. I will say, on the venture side, we've seen folks be pretty stable in terms of investment analysis. So they do see some of these investors actually investing less. The late stage crossover side is really where you see the folks that were very active in 2021 really paring back and not being as involved in this late stage. Although the question is, well, how come late stage is still so active? We'll see that in the next slide. But on the corporate side as well, a lot of the folks that were very active in 2021 have really pulled back in 2022 in terms of the new investments that they're doing. Next slide, please, Annie. But if we look, and this is a busy slide, I know, but we're going to send these to you guys and you can take a look at it in detail. But what's interesting is instead of the folks who maybe were more active in 2021, new investors, both on the late stage side, which is in green, and the corporate side, which is in gold, have been a lot more active in 2022, like way more active than I would have predicted. And so you're seeing some of these folks, like a D1 Capital or an Essex Woodlands or an RA or a Jumbo Atlantic, a KKR even, so private equity folks, Ally Bridge, folks that maybe aren't in our league list of top late stage investors, really coming in and looking for opportunities. And again, that may be because in biopharma, it's a lot more difficult to look for those opportunities, and a lot of those companies are super early stage, whereas in device, a lot of them do or are into revenues that are raising some of these late stage rounds. So you can look at gross margin, you can look at revenues, you can project out cash flow break even, et cetera. And so that may be sort of an area where investors are sort of finding a way to continue to invest without maybe the frothiness of some of the other sectors' high valuations that we saw maybe in health tech and biopharma. So I think what's really interesting here is, while in biotech, you can take a list of like 15, 20 firms and they do 80% of all the investing in that arena, device is a lot more stratified. And so you really have to sort of take a look, who's active now, what are they doing, and where are they active in? And those are the types of things that we put in the report all the time. And we're always happy to talk to folks about what we're seeing out in the market. Next slide. So we have a couple more slides on the M&A side, and then we're going to transition over to health tech. If you look overall in exits, this is my first half year slide, and you see 6 private M&A, no IPOs in 2022. And why is that? Really, it's because we've seen a degradation of the companies that have gone IPO over the last couple of years. And if you look on the bottom chart here, the class of 2019 was amazing for Device, and they still are performing really, really well. But if you look at 2020 and 2021 classes, 2020 started out really spectacularly well. If you look at the end of year stats, up 111% on the median, 148% average. But then you see over 2021 and 2022, these classes have continued to decline and had market cap erosion. You see that in the class of 2021 as well. So it's very difficult when you think, why would public market investors want to get into IPOs right now when you've seen a 2-year sort of collapse in value for a lot of the companies that went IPO. So that's really why IPOs are really closed. And if we go to the next slide. So transitioning to M&A, 2021 really was the most diverse acquirer set we've ever seen. And if you look at, this is sort of by year, by the more interesting indications that we follow, you can see just the sheer number of acquirers in 2021 that were active in the market. And it made us really excited because these were a lot of small and mid-market cap companies that were really going after new technologies. Made us think 2022 was going to be a fantastic arena because all of a sudden it's not just, Medtronic and Boston as the major investors. It was, C-Spine and, Nuvasive and Axonics, et cetera. But what we saw was with the market, a cap erosion that we've seen in 2022, the small and mid caps have been hit maybe just as hard, if not harder, than some of the recent IPOs. So those folks are really focused internally right now. They don't have the ability to leverage cash and or continue to expend cash by acquiring new technologies. So they're a little bit on the sidelines. So most of the investments or exits that we've seen so far in 2022 are from the more established investors. We go to the next slide. And you can see on the private M&A side, so these are deals that are $50 million or more upfront. Definitely a reduction in the number of deals from 2021 into 2022, at least for the first half. What we've seen, Q3, we've had a couple more. In Q4, there's 2 more to add. So we'll end up being, 8 to 10 deals for the year, which is definitely behind what we've seen in the past. And even the upfronts for these deals, which you can see on the bottom in red, they're down a little bit, $135 million upfront. And you can see some of the deals that we've seen over in the first half of this year. And what we try and do is look at what's the pathway for these companies. Are these sort of iterative products that are 510K that either don't need clinical trials or maybe very limited clinical trials, or are they PMA pathway that need extensive clinical trials? And what does that really look like? And you can see, a little bit more on the 510K side, but there's been a couple PMA. But if we actually dive into that, I think it's pretty interesting. So if we go to the next slide, Annie, which is the last slide, and then we're going to transition over to health tech. If you look at M&A by pathway between 510K and PMA, it's very interesting. What we've noticed over time in 510K is almost all the folks that are along those pathways need to get to clearance and then raise a commercialization round before they get to exit. And that has been common both in between 2015 and 2018 versus sort of this more current period of time, 2019 through 2022. And so what is interesting on the 510K side is it feels like companies are being a little bit more careful with their cash expenditures. Because if you look at invested capital, it's gone down. The upfronts have actually gone up. And we've actually seen, not only are we seeing upfronts for 510K deals, but we are seeing milestones to be earned. And so you can see there's, a $65 million potential in earnouts now, whereas in earlier times, really, it was the upfront, and that was basically it. And frankly, the time to exit for these deals have come down. So you're seeing maybe these companies are a little bit later stage when they're getting that Series A. That's one prognosis or hypothesis as well for that. But it is good to see the 510K deals actually getting higher in deal value. So then if you transition over to the right and you look at PMAs are really interesting because between 2015 and 2018, almost all the PMAs that got acquired were acquired before FDA approval. And they were either development stage or they had CE mark and they were in clinical trials and they got picked up. And so the invested capital was actually similar to 510K because the 510K folks had to actually raise that commercialization round. But the M&A values were bigger. But what's interesting in the more of the recent time period, 2019 through 2022, is that you're seeing more of these companies having to get FDA approval and then also then raise a commercialization round and ramp before they got acquired. And they're not necessarily getting rewarded by that because you're seeing M&A deal values actually come down. It's a little bit of a biased analysis because over the last 3 years, we have seen, let's say 40 US IPOs during that period of time. A lot of those companies are PMA focused companies. And so those are not part of this data set because they ended up going IPO versus an M&A. But it is interesting to look where 510K is actually, you're seeing a little bit of growth in deal value. On the PMA side, it's retracted a little bit. But in the end, I think what's interesting is you're seeing a lot of activity here in terms of investment. And while M&A is down for now, I don't think it's out. I think we're going to see a step up into 2023. And maybe with that, I'll send it over to Raysa.
Hey, John, real quick.
Oh yeah.
Two questions that are a little pertinent to what you're discussing.
You got it.
One was, what about diagnostics? Do you include diagnostics as device, or is that a separate category for you all?
It's a separate category. We have a DX tools side where diagnostics is a yes/no tool, basically proprietary test we look at. Then we also look at R&D tools that are selling into biopharma and academia, and then also DX analytics, which is a little bit more SaaS-based. So we do have that sector, and I'm happy to provide some data on that, but it's not in this particular scenario. I do think on the diagnostic side, it's tough sledding. We are seeing some good activity in Series A, but the issue with diagnostics always becomes, once you get out into the market, how do you get reimbursement and how do you scale revenue? And that is such a tough part of the diagnostics pathway because you have to have salespeople and you also have to be engaging with the payers. And a lot of times that can be really difficult. But with that being said, we do have data on that. I'm always happy to follow up with that person.
Awesome. And then last one is, and then we'll ask the rest later, how does the cardiovascular sector fare versus the rest of the market?
Cardiovascular is a pretty strong area. If you think about overall since 2017, I think cardiovascular and orthopedic are neck and neck on the M&A side. I will say definitely cardiovascular has bigger exit values and a shorter time to exit than you see in orthopedics. I think that's really because on the cardiovascular side, usually big market, and these companies start to do their pivotal clinical, and you have the acquirers swirling around, and that ends up equaling a pretty nice exit. But we have data specifically in cardiovascular, and always happy to chat with people about what we have. But Perfect. I would say definitely orthopedics and cardiovascular are probably the top two sectors. But I think if you looked at it by deal value, cardiovascular ends up being significantly higher in the median and total deal value.
Okay, we had a few more questions come in, but we'll save those till the end here. So Raysa and Annie, thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. So I'll be covering health tech. So health tech investment has mirrored a broader market downturn in 2022 with deal pace and dollars down from last year. So last year was an unprecedented year for all of healthcare, but especially for health tech. And this year we've seen the market rebalance from those unsustainable levels. So a combination of tumultuous public markets, global geopolitical factors, rising interest rates, all work to rebalance health tech investments with an especially sharp drop in Q3. Part of the investment slowdown has been a valuation reset, which is painful for many, but also a healthy and natural part of the cycle. And a lot of the downward pressure on valuations is coming from poor public health tech stock performance, which Annie will cover in just a bit. That pressure is felt mostly at the later stages, whose valuations were inflated from last year's financings. And so consequently, we've seen a lot of the investment move to the earlier stages, with Q1 of this year actually marking the biggest year for seed Series A investment in health tech. And you can see in the data the deal, the dollars are significantly down, but the volume of deals is pretty sustained. And that's because we're still seeing good activity at the early stage. The biggest hits have been at the later stage, especially for mega rounds, which are rounds over $100 million. However, as I said, deal pace at the early stage is sustained. And part of that idea, is that it's cheaper to invest in companies where the valuations aren't inflated from last year. And there's also this idea that by the time the company raises its Series B, C, D, there will have been more time for the markets to shake out and valuations to have shaken out as well. In addition to the flight to early stage, there's also been a flight to quality. So investors are looking for either revenue or at least paths to profitability, and for companies that are really pushing the needle on healthcare costs, accessibility, et cetera. And so we predict for health tech investment to reach 27 billion across US and EU through the end of the year. Next slide, please. So here we break down health tech investment into subsectors. And what I want to point out here is alternative care, which is in that lighter blue color. So these are those companies that are providing care outside of a typical provider setting, usually with a like digitally enabled, could be virtual or a hybrid model, like through an app and then also in person. And so historically, these companies have received the lion's share of health tech investment. You can see that massive growth in 2020 and 2021 as virtual care became necessary and then became the norm. However, you can see it's hit pretty hard in 2022. And interestingly, provider operations in that navy blue is sustained. And provider operations are those companies that are equipping traditional providers with technology to either increase their virtual offerings or optimize their workflows, reduce costs, reduce physician burnout. And so demand for these companies has grown a lot this year. And with growing consumerization of healthcare, there is now a standard that is set in place for folks to have virtual options when it comes to their healthcare. And with all those alternative care companies scaling last year to huge amounts, like One Medical, Village MD, there's never been more pressure on providers to adopt technology and innovate to compete with them. And so although alternative care investment is pretty down, we think there's a really strong opportunity for provider operations companies this year and into next year as well. Next slide, please. So this slide is showing healthcare unicorns by birth year. So the first round, private round, where they're valued over 1 billion. As part of that valuation reset and downward pressure, we've seen less unicorns born in 2022. There's been a 47% decrease in births year over year. So consistent with the trends we saw in investment, interestingly, you can see in alternative care just that crazy influx of unicorns and that slowdown in 2022. Interestingly, though, provider operations, you have the same amount born this year. So again, really promising area for provider operations. Next slide, please. So this slide summarizes the key challenges that health tech entrepreneurs are trying to solve. And as you can see, I think some of the big takeaways are some of the biggest funded problems in 2022, which those bars indicate investment this year, are problems in the provider operations space. So reducing physician burnout and administrative burden, discovering precision drugs, so like clinical trial enablement and using AI and machine learning for drug discovery, improving quality of care and outcomes. These are all top funded issues, and companies that are working to actually push the needle in these areas are continuing to receive funding. I think a good takeaway from this is that the healthcare industry, it's not going anywhere, and it's still ripe for innovation and plagued by challenges or problems, however you want to phrase it, that continue to grow. Like mental health care is continuing to grow in demand. Like healthcare costs in the US are skyrocketing. So despite the broader market downturn, the healthcare industry is necessary, it's here to stay, and it tends to be more resilient in times of economic downturn anyway. So top quality health tech companies that are getting funded in this environment are really pushing the needle on some of these key issues. Next slide, please. So here I have a bit more detail on the alternative care subsector. So as I mentioned, alternative care saw the sharpest decrease in investment. And this is mostly because of just the influx of investment last year that was unsustainable. And so investment shifted dramatically to the early stage here. You can see investment also shifted more towards hybrid care, which is in that navy color. That model specifically, which again combines in-person and virtual options, has really risen in popularity. And interestingly, you know, virtual care options were kind of a need to have during the pandemic, and now research is catching up with whether or not it's effective. And so there's been interesting research coming out that shows that virtual and hybrid is actually more effective in primary care and chronic condition management settings. So the fact that it's having tangible incomes or outcomes and improvements on patient care is improving investor confidence in the space, especially in the hybrid care model. And with healthcare costs continuing to climb, it's more important than ever for providers to shift care from acute, expensive settings into virtual and hybrid care settings. So we continue to expect to see that shift going forward. On the bottom, you can see by application which alternative care companies got the most or funding in terms of dollars and deals. And so we've continued to see mental health dominate investment after impressive activity in 2021. In fact, mental health and primary care received more than half of all virtual care investment in 2022. We've also seen companies evolve from point solutions to platform. So point solution is one that provides just one specific type of healthcare, say mental health, versus platform where you can go to one solution for multiple health issues. And so last year we saw a lot of point solutions born, which they often provide more effective healthcare, but there's also this issue of point solution fatigue that is felt by consumers and employers and even providers and payers, where you are overwhelmed by the number of point solutions that are in the market. And so we're seeing a lot of big players move from point solution to platform, which gives them additional revenue streams and also helps solve the issue of care coordination and primary care gaps. So we're continuing to see companies shift to platform, and we expect to see so going forward. So next, I'll pass it to Annie, who will touch on some more health tech investment and exit trends.
Thanks, Raysa. First off, I will chat just a little bit about female founders in health tech. This was an awesome year for female founders. They broke a record for having the most capital invested as a percentage this year at 19%, and this is higher than the other 3 sectors that we cover in healthcare too. So that's pretty exciting. 2 companies in 2022 hit unicorn status. Those are Bellabeat and Wheel, founded by females. And then in this year, there have been more female-founded companies valued over 100 million than in 2021, which is really interesting, just given like all the mega rounds last year. We really believe that increasing perspectives in the pool of knowledge due to diversity in all the sense of the word will create better solutions to healthcare's toughest problems. And it's great because women can provide a unique lens and identify with female consumers. Moving on, I'm gonna kind of switch gears and talk about women's health. So the women's health industry has really never seen more momentum. It's a very exciting time. The largest fund devoted to women's health investment closed this year, and more funds and investors are taking a focus to women's health around the world. I'd mentioned Bellabeat, which is the second women's health unicorn. It's kind of like an Apple Watch type product, but specifically for women. They were born into unicorn this year. And also this year through Q3 has surpassed any other year for seed and Series A investment into women's health. This is huge because last year was such a big year for everything. The fact that seed and Series A deals have surpassed it is amazing, and just shows how many companies are out there and starting and getting funded. A lot of women's health solutions are personalized and specific, but we've heard positively that a lot of investor and payer sentiment is shifting from these solutions being too niche to receiving more attention, which is great. Valuations, which are lower than last year, are still increasing. And we think that this space is a huge opportunity, and investors are going to continue to strike on these opportunities. What's interesting on this slide is that 2022 is the first year that fertility and pregnancy have taken in the lion's share of investment in women's health. So previous years, other indications have gained a lot of traction and still are, but those could include menopause, PCOS or endometriosis, women's mental health, pelvic floor health, to name a few. I believe that these other areas are going to increase substantially over the next few years as more attention and light is shed onto the specific issues women face. Another trend which kind of mirrors alternative care is that we're seeing point solutions moving to whole person care. Maven Clinic, if you know it, recently announced the addition of menopause care to their services, and Kindbody, which is a fertility company, expanded into women's mental health. And a couple of companies are already doing this by offering primary care and other services along with gynecology and focusing on whole person care rather than just a point solution. This kind of specialized care is improving maternal health outcomes and increasing access to specialty providers where in cases where women may not have had access before. And like I said, it's really exciting to watch this increased focus on women's health to raise awareness and dismantle the taboo around specific women's health conditions. So I'll talk about health tech exits a bit now. In 2022, there have been no US, EU, or UK venture-backed IPOs. The chart on the top right, as of Q3, shows health tech IPO performance against the S&P 500. And as of at the end of October, median performance for health tech stocks is down 58%. And this kind of shows that public market enthusiasm has dissipated a bit for now for these health tech companies, especially the publicly traded unicorns that we thought were going to do a bit better. SPACs, which were popular last year, have also performed poorly. You can see in the purple bar. And our experts on the team don't necessarily consider this to be the most viable option for health tech companies right now and moving forward, especially with the IPO window shut. Only One Medical performed positively this year after Amazon's announcement that they were going to acquire it. And we think that IPOs are gonna be delayed another year or so, with companies in health tech exploring M&A opportunities instead. So this is from our health tech report, and I just want to give a little disclosure that this data includes M&A with undisclosed deal size. And as of Q4, there have only really been about 8 M&A in health tech with disclosed deal sizes. But with that being said, median acquisition prices for M&A and health tech are down this year as investors are kind of dealing with the lofty 2021 valuations. Interestingly, in health tech, most of the acquirers are public healthcare companies, and private equity acquisitions have declined. There have been no M&As over 1 billion this year, but there were 4 last year, showing the deal sizes going down. We expect that more health tech companies and healthcare companies will use cash from their large 2021 rounds to continue to be opportunistic acquirers in the next year, especially if IPOs are delayed. And this can help bolster services for healthcare companies enhance their offerings, create new revenue streams. We're also noticing that big tech companies are also becoming more prevalent as acquirers in the health tech space, with Amazon's acquisition of One Medical and Microsoft's acquisition of Nuance Communications. We expect this trend to continue as well, and as well as just overall more consolidation in the health tech space over the next year. And Jon, I'll send it back to you to talk about our predictions and takeaways.
Great. Yeah, just quickly, if you sort of think about the market overall and where we think things are going to happen, the best companies will be able to finance. I think when we looked at the venture capital that's been raised over the last couple of years, it's substantial. I think the trends that we're obviously seeing here are, seed deals as well as Series A deals seem to be looking to find ways to, if you're not one of the very top deals, you haven't hit your milestones or even the moved milestones that sort of new investors are looking at. A lot of these folks are doing inside rounds and sort of pushing that cash burn into 2023. But if you do hit those milestones, there's capital there. And we are seeing for the very best companies, multiple term sheets, continued step ups, et cetera. But for the late stage folks who sort of work their way into what you would say now, as you're looking back, frothy valuations, based on where the comps are for public market now, there's going to be some valuation resets. And I think folks have to figure out how they're going to take their medicine, and when they're going to do that. It's maybe better to take the down round and invite a new investor in to have additional support down the road than to maybe do an inside round and push that out and hope that you're going to hit a metric that's going to get a new investor coming in. Because what you're doing at that point is you're continuing to dwindle your sort of insider dry powder support. And so if you do hit those milestones, you're in good shape. If not, you've sort of turned yourself into a much weaker company in terms of what you can contribute to the next round. So again, record dollars are out there, and companies will get funded, but it's going to be a tough time in 23. On the device side, I think non-invasive monitoring, imaging technologies, you're leveraging the cloud and AI machine learning technologies. That continues to be a really interesting area. Maybe on the imaging side, not so much early stage, but there's some late stage companies as well as some DX analytics type companies that are leveraging that in a big way. I think the new sort of these late stage investors in the device sector is just a godsend for the industry, because you are finding folks that are interested in looking at more metric driven companies. But I do think for a lot of these device folks, when they raise that next round, a path to profitability, maybe at at the expense of the accelerator of growth, is probably a smart plan. And you need to have the plan. You need to have the step on the accelerator growth plan. You need to have the scale back, let's get to profitability plan as well. So that's really where, margin is a huge, area that folks are going to be thinking about on the late stage side, as well as sort of curtailing expenses. Maybe I'll hand it back to Annie on the health tech side, or Raysa.
Sure. Yeah, I can take it. So for health tech, kind of just a recap of what Raysa and I had talked about, we're going to see a continued shift to earlier stages where valuations aren't as inflated from last year's unsustainable levels. Raysa talked about the flight to quality, as the best companies are going to need to show profitability and the ability to actually improve outcomes and reduce costs in a tangible way. Provider operations, mental health, and women's health all continue to see sustained investment. We don't see this stopping. We expect more private to private consolidation in health tech and more tech acquirers entering the space. Amazon, I think, just recently announced virtual care in 32 states or something. So that's an example of that. And then we think that de-SPACs is not a viable exit path, and IPOs are going to be on hold while M&A is going to continue.
Great. So I think that basically finishes our presentation. Again, just to highlight, the health tech report just came out a month or so ago, and that has a lot of the slides that Annie and Raysa went over. We're going to have a full year report that's going to come out very early in January, the first week of January. So look out for that. And in the meantime, we're always happy to answer questions. And Dwayne, not sure if there's any questions for us before the end of the webinar today.
Yeah, there's quite a few. So I will try to give them to you guys as rapid fire as possible. One of the ones that I think is pretty straightforward, we actually had 2 questions on it, John, this is for you, is do you separate de novo from 510K, or where does de novo? Oh, it does.
I do. The downside is there's like 4 companies to look at. And so the N was not very big. So I did just look at PMA and 510K. If you are de novo and you want to talk about that, please feel free to get in touch with me. And I'm happy to share the de novo data I have.
Okay, and then will the deck, do you plan to share the deck with attendees after the meeting as well?
Yeah, that's fine, absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, great.
And just knowing what, all this stuff is kind of preliminary data, and the numbers do change over time. And so, what the numbers look like in the year-end report may not be exactly what you're seeing right here, but just know that, it's very directionally relevant for what we're doing, but not perfect as new deals get added to PitchBook, et cetera.
Yeah, okay. Raysa and Annie, one question that I had as well, you showed us slides of unicorns in the health tech space. Have you done any analysis of what makes those companies different, right? Because the challenge that even med tech companies face, health tech companies face, is they're selling to arguably the most conservative industry in the world, right? Which is healthcare. And so you talk about these companies that are pushing the edge and pushing the boundaries. What have they done well that maybe some other companies who have been a little more abstract haven't done well?
Yeah, I could take a stab at this, and then Annie, feel free to jump in, and John. I think an interesting angle that I've looked at is the business model, as in, are they direct to consumer or are they selling to enterprise? And I think something that's been really big in the past few years has been consumerization of healthcare. So focusing on the consumer, putting the consumer at the forefront of decisions and their experience in the healthcare journey. And so you see a lot of these companies emphasizing that, putting that at the forefront. And therefore, I think attracting investors that are not typically in the healthcare space with deep pockets, which pushes the valuations up. So you've seen a lot of that. But also, I think this year, consumer acquisition costs have actually never been higher. And with inflation and the economy, I think consumer spend is down. And so you also see some of these companies not only doing direct to consumer, but also to enterprise, which allows them to sell to these pre-established networks of patients, allows them to scale and be profitable and just have a lot more data to prove their effectiveness. So I think a lot of the companies that have reached unicorn status have hit that nice balance of, including the consumer, but also being able to sell to enterprise.
Awesome. We had quite a few questions about seeing the diagnostic information as well. So what I would recommend for anybody who's asking about that, when John, Raysa, or Annie send the deck, feel free to just reach out to them directly, because we've had like 3 or 4 people reach out and ask about the diagnostic side.
And I'll say, if you just go on svb.com and you go to the insights side, you can see our mid-year paper, which covers all 4 sectors, which includes DX and tools. But if you want to talk a little bit about what's happened in the second half of the year, again, we're always happy to have those conversations, and happy to do that.
Great. John, another question that came in for you is, do you see a difference between European and US companies when it comes to readiness with 510K?
It's a great question. It's probably a little bit above my perspective in terms of what I see on a day-to-day basis. So I'm not sure, but I am happy to sort of, if that person has that specific question, I'm happy to get them sort of connected to our specific med tech folks that are working with companies. I'm smart enough to know when I don't have a good answer. So that's one of them. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah. John, one of the questions I asked you earlier was about diagnostic, right? How about like non-invasive monitoring companies? Do they fall under? I mean, and also just think like software as a medical device, do they fall under diagnostic or do they fall under health
They
tech?
fall under device if there's actually something that the patient's wearing. And I think if there's one area of device that has accelerated in the COVID-19 times, it's that arena, because it really is like hand in hand with alternative care. Can you find a way to monitor your patient, outside of the hospital? And especially on the cardiovascular side, we've seen some nice exits in that arena. But there's a lot of other areas on the neuro side as well, that are sort of accelerating. And if you think about, I think probably 3 of the top 5 deals this year in device were non-invasive monitoring, multi-$100-million deals. So that is an area of high excitement. But I will also sort of say, if there's one area where in device we get a little bit worried about valuation inflation, it's going to be in that non-invasive monitoring area, because what we're seeing is probably a little bit more of the non-traditional device folks are coming into that sector with the excitement of being able to sort of leverage that, intersection between device, gathering data, sending it to the cloud, monitoring. It's a little bit more tech sweet spot. And so I just worry a little bit on the valuation side. But there's no doubt that that's a super important part of where we are in the device sector, and there's going to be a lot of interest in that arena.
Awesome. Annie, I think this one's for you here. And it's more asking about SVP's interest in other companies in other countries, right? So do you do international work? So the specific question is, are you interested in meeting with women's health focused companies in Sweden?
Yeah, so our EMEA office in the UK, they have a great team, and I think she's the director of health tech over there, is huge into women's health. So I'd be happy to put anyone in contact with her or with the right people on that team. But yeah, absolutely, we do have a global presence.
Okay, fantastic. Last question we can end on here, and it was something that came in ahead of time, but there's a lot of startup companies on here that are in that seed or Series A round. And so what are the best methods on raising capital for those seed round investors? And I guess maybe like one tip from each of you would be helpful.
Yeah, I would say, leverage your insider support right now and have that backup plan. Because, if you think about seed Series A, 2 years ago, the power really was with the entrepreneur. Now I really feel like the power is back with the investor. And so, having a backup plan and being able to have a scaled down version of how you can run lean is so important right now. I know it's not a great, very positive, exciting answer, but that would be my answer.
I think my 2 cents is that there's just never been more scrutiny on proving outcomes and effectiveness. So the earlier you can start measuring that in data and outcomes, the better.
Yeah, definitely what Raysa said. I also want to add that specifically for health tech, even though money's harder to come by, I think in what we've been hearing is that it's still a great time to start a company and venture into that space. So even though it might be difficult and you might have to prove more or better outcomes or revenue or get out of the pilot phase, it's still a great time to start a company.
Yeah, so I'll leave everyone with this because we talked about it before we started the webinar. So at our Project Medtech Startup Symposium in Houston, Texas, Renee Ryan, speaking of women entrepreneurs, she runs a group called Cala Health. She had made the comment to the group that no one's ever died from dilution, but they've died from running out of capital. And so just to keep that in mind when you're out there raising money. With that being said, Jon, Raysa, Annie, thank you so much for the presentation. oftentimes this happens where when there's so much information on slides, there's a lot of questions that we either couldn't get to or we had to kind of rush through a little bit. So I encourage everyone listening in, if you have additional questions, feel free to reach out to them on LinkedIn. You'll get a copy of the deck. You'll get a recording of the presentation as well. But thank you so much for your time, and thanks Galen Data for putting on this webinar series. And thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.